Activision Blizzard is an amazing company. At one point, perhaps you could have assumed that they were going to put out non-stop top-quality content, much like Pixar and the Walt Disney Company. And yet both companies have fallen. In the case of Activision Blizzard, we now have a whistleblower, ready to come forward and tell us exactly how the fall happened, what was going on behind the scenes, and was the depravity that has been alleged against Blizzard legitimate? Or is it entirely overblown, perhaps part of a narrative intended to run off the prior geniuses who made everything work? Ladies and gentlemen, it is time to join a former Activision Blizzard employee, ready to spill the beans on everything. Let's get into it right now. All right, Frosthammer, it is great to have you on the channel. So excited to get into this conversation with you about the history of Blizzard, and I suppose somewhat Activision Blizzard. Before we do so, though, we've got Jonas J. Campbell joining us, investigative reporter for ThatParkPlace.com, as well as Fat Steven JFG. The fat is not about his weight. No, ladies and gentlemen, it is saying something entirely different. What does the acronym stand for again, Jonas?
Pretty hot and tempting.
Pretty hot and tempting. Steven JFG. Steven, welcome back.
Oh, thank you for having me.
All right, Frosthammer, you worked for Blizzard at a time when the company was cranking out classic game after classic game, games that revolutionized the genres in which they existed. Can you give us a rundown of sort of the time period in which you worked at the company, which was renowned throughout the Western and Eastern world?
Primarily, I was there during Warcraft 3's launch. I was basically there initially as a what do you call it? A student, basically. And it was basically I got in there because of who I knew, not necessarily what I knew at that time. So that was my introduction to the gaming industry, though I had a lot of Blizzard contacts for a long time because I was lucky enough to get into the original Starcraft and Diablo betas.
Cool.
So I basically had been hanging around that for a long time. And since at that point, the majority of the time you were playing with actual employees as opposed to random people, it was a really good way to network. So I was there for about, I think, 18 months during the start of Warcraft 3. And then I went off to do my thing in college. And then afterwards went into the legal field for a while. And then went not my cup of tea and got invited back to Blizzard to work there from about the very end of the Burning Crusade up until midway through Cataclysm.
Okay, so that's a very interesting time then to look at. So let's go into the Burning Crusade, which was the first expansion for World of Warcraft. And at that time, it's my understanding that the team behind World of Warcraft had transitioned significantly. I believe at that time, Mark Kern had already left. Is that right?
Actually, I don't know who Mark Kern is exactly. I mean, I know the name in passing, but I've honestly never met him. During those times, I would have seen him. I was actually on night shift at the time. So,
I see. Okay. Well, he was the original game lead for World of Warcraft Vanilla. And so that's why I think he stepped out as the Burning Crusade was coming out. And so the reason I ask that is because it seems to me that there was significant turnover at that time within the World of Warcraft development team. And perhaps that was also largely due to the fact that the game was growing exponentially still. Can you tell us what it was like working for Blizzard at a time when it was so exciting?
Well, honestly, I'd say it was more exciting when I was there during the Warcraft 3 original run. Back during that period of time, Blizzard was more of a house where we were trying to always encourage each other to be better or come up with better ideas or just sit around for like hours having brainstorming sessions. It wasn't as regimented or rigid as it had become by the time World of Warcraft came out. Leading into World of Warcraft, that's when they started getting into a lot of more stricter project management ideologies. And that was also probably about the time that the PMI stuff started getting really big. That's project management institution.
Mm-hmm.
And that started leaning into a lot of the creativity, got kind of pushed to the side to some degree or another. But also, as World of Warcraft was evolving, and I'm talking back before it was actually an alpha, there was already a lot of change up and kind of push and shove going on already, where people were trying to kind of get their ideas out and try to take anybody else's ideas and take credit for them. So it turned more into a rat race versus more of an actual like creativity house, which was really disheartening to me. I didn't realize it going back into the company, and I had a lot of my ideas purged and taken and utilized, and there are probably so many things in the game that I'm responsible for that nobody's ever going to see my name as credits for.
So, can I ask, PMI, is that like a project management kind of thing where it's a very rigid, like corporate dictated, we need to hit these milestones by these days and flowing out to the company? Is that a reasonable understanding?
If you actually look up Project Management Institute, they're based out of Pennsylvania. They actually have wrote the book for most of project management that's being utilized in the wider scope of the industry these days. Not necessarily just the gaming industry, but like insurance industry, anything else you can probably think of. And the level of discipline that's based upon PMI's guidelines directly dictates how much certain powers of management has to do with it. So within the gaming industry, they were using the term producer a lot more to symbolize what was utilized in Hollywood, where they have changed over now to using the term project manager, and will probably generally still use producer as credits, but they tend to use the term project manager internally these days.
Okay. And also, so this would have been around the time like Vivendi would have been the parent company at this point, right?
It was in, I don't know, it wasn't in transition. Vivendi, I was definitely still primarily in charge. I remember the dreaded email we got when Activision took over. That was right as Wrath of the Lich King was launching.
All right. Sorry, I was just trying to place some ambiance here, some environment.
I understand your fear with the Activision thing. That was the same way I felt as a Destiny player when they were commandeered with Bungie. So I understand that fear.
Well, it's definitely a weird position because Activision used to be, one of the best game publishers and game designers out there. Mm-hmm. Like they literally paid top dollar and treated their employees like rock stars until shifts happened. And obviously we can take a lot of what happened and changed looking at Bobby Kotick as the person who actually did it. Mm-hmm. I kind of sit back and blame him for where the gaming industry is right now, because he's the one who brought in the whole idea of KPIs and pushing for absolute deadlines regardless of if a product is done or not. Blizzard used to always have the joke of, we're not going to put it out until it's ready.
And it wasn't a joke even. They really did believe that, correct?
Yeah, and we actually slashed a lot of projects while I was there. The Starcraft, not MMO, the N64 game. That was actually
Starcraft Ghost, right?
Yeah, that's what it was. I had to think about that for a second. Yeah, that was actually in a really interesting spot, but it came down to a lot of politics why it didn't actually end up getting out.
Did you get a chance to play test that at all in its early builds?
When we employees have access to the main server that has all the installers from basically every game that's ever been produced, test run, and every build of it. At least cool. I understand what they somewhat recently had some sort of crash where they lost a lot of that data. But we used to have access to all that stuff.
Oh man, that's tragic to think about. So much of that history just lost.
Does that also relate to the whole, I think it was the leaked playable build of Ghost came out like years later around 2020. Was that actually a verified playable copy, or was that just made by someone else?
I don't remember if Ghost came out. I would imagine that it's very plausible. The work from home agreements were pretty lenient at the time. So if you were doing work from home, you had access to the entire server, just accessing it through a VPN. So it's very likely somebody snatched it up and didn't actually delete it as they were supposed to.
Mm.
So, Frost, let's talk about the changeover from Warcraft 3, which you've stated it was a much more pleasant and vivifying sort of experience working on Warcraft 3 versus when you came back and you were working on the first expansion for World of Warcraft. Let's dive into the atmosphere and what you think specifically changed beyond just perhaps a consultation company coming in. Had the personalities changed? Had there been a shifting of the viewpoint where perhaps during Warcraft 3's development, people saw themselves as being part of a small group of dedicated gamers who wanted to create new games, and maybe there was a corporatization of the company when you came back for World of Warcraft? But I don't want to put words in your mouth, but just tell us about what had changed in terms of the mood and the atmosphere.
So one of the biggest things I probably should mention that is not really well known out in the normal world is Blizzard definitely had this campus culture that was talked about, but moreover as a gaming culture. So people started to kind of take battle lines based upon what guild they literally were in World of Warcraft.
Oh my gosh!
So
what a funny thing.
Chris Metzen had his own guild. Tom Chilton had his own guild. I don't think Dustin Broder actually was doing his own thing at the time. Bill Roper still kind of had a guild for a while. Bill Roper had left the company a long time since.
Right.
So he was definitely more of, I just want to see what's going on more than I want to play the game. And I was in both Tom Chilton's guild and Chris Benson's guild at different points. And literally the way they acted was kind of like, this is my team. I'm looking out for my team. So there was a sort of nepotism that existed there that wasn't. It was a weird kind of nepotism that I don't think you have ever seen in the industry and probably won't ever see again.
I've never heard of such. That's amazing to me that people were divided among lines based on the guild that they were in being run by people higher up in the company.
That's
at the highest levels.
Mm-hmm.
So you're saying nepotism by membership in a World of Warcraft guild?
Not only that, but also, well, I guess that kind of by that point was true, but it's also nepotism by the fact that when Blizzard was a smaller company, they liked to hire their friends more so than they liked to hire people who were qualified.
Mm-hmm.
That would be a direct reason how I got in, because I knew the right people to get me in the door. Where does it go with that? So nepotism at that point, it was good for building and maintaining the culture at the time. 1 second. But as the company grew exponentially, anybody who's ever been in a company that exceeds like 100 employees, there's definitely this big changeover when the company has to try to figure out how to go from 50 employees to 100 employees to 200 employees to 1,000 employees.
And that was happening rapidly, correct?
Sure that you are, I don't know how to put it exactly, keeping the culture for sure. And that's part of where probably some of the lines came from, the guild lines, because the guild lines really ended up supporting the culture that particular guild was strongly associated with.
Can I ask you how many employees at this point are you talking about? Are we talking about under 200?
When I was there during Warcraft 3, it was really more about 50 to 100 with a lot of temporary employees. And then when I came back for World of Warcraft, we were already exceeding 2,000, and we actually were starting to get some people coming in from Activision. So it was kind of, looking back on it, it could have been some of Activision trying to get in just to check out the waters, see what's going on, and attempt to start building their culture within the Blizzard culture.
So let's talk about the guy at the helm, I suppose, Mike Morhaime. Did you have a front row seat to see how his leadership was manifested within a small company, and then as it had grown dramatically clearly, I mean, we're talking about a tenfold increase in employees. That had to have been quite the adjustment for him. Did you get a chance to monitor that? And what are your thoughts on it?
Not so much monitor, because I feel like he tried to continue the same management style he had from being a small company to a big company, but was definitely not in the know about a lot of the underlying problems that were starting to happen. He saw the whole guild thing as friendly competition, and it definitely started out as friendly competition, no doubt. But some of the more intricacies, like the rat racing I talked about, he definitely was not really in the know about and had problems believing it. But on the same token, he was definitely the guy who always stood up for the company. He definitely was always had a door open if you want to go in and talk to him. And there definitely was a difference of having to make an appointment versus not having to make an appointment back when he was, between the two times I was there. But he was always willing to talk to people. And he, as far as a leader goes, he's definitely the type of leader that you'd want at your back. But I don't think he was prepared for the dramatic culture shifts that were happening.
So let's talk about the culture shifts, and also let's briefly discuss some of the more unsavory things that have come out recently. You were talking about the guild issues. I think also you alluded to the issues with perhaps the frat lifestyle that had come in. Can you talk to us a little bit about how severe was some of the bad behavior? Without naming names, we're not here to do that, but how severe was some of the bad behavior? Was it isolated? Was it there from the beginning, or did it manifest when you came back? Walk us through, like, was there a moment where you thought, uh-oh, this is something that could really damage the company long term, or is this largely overblown and perhaps something that came into being after you had left the second time?
Trying to think, because some of the stuff was always so. I definitely feel like the woke culture that has been evolving at Blizzard and the around the community at large has definitely made some of the things get blown out of proportion. But there were definitely some things that were happening behind the scenes that were big gauges of what was happening, and if people would have known about it at the time, there could have been some time to avert or change it.
So you think that was happening it was below the observation of top leadership then?
Absolutely beyond the top leadership. There were one or two people in the top leadership that were partaking, but they weren't. Okay, so let's take a look at the whole Cosby Room Suite thing. That's kind of an example, I think, that got a little bit blown out of proportion. So while I don't like Alex Frenzio, I can't pronounce his last name correctly, as a person, I always thought he was very creepy. Other people that were there were people that were just going there to have a good time and hang out, not to be creepers. Like Greg Street, for instance, I can speak to him. He's somebody who was always there to back up his employees, and he was married at the time. He wasn't there to go fraternize with younger chicks in a creepy way. As a matter of fact, he excused himself, from what I understood, as soon as that started happening. So I mean, it's something that I feel has gone blown out of proportion quite a bit. But on the same token, there definitely was aspects of the behavior that were threatening the culture of the company. Don't deny that. To give you some examples, though, going back to what your question was about things that would have happened in the company that would have kind of been some aspects of what was happening. Something I'm actually just recalling right now is earlier on, Blizzard started finding a group to scapegoat whenever something was going wrong. So, for instance, back when World of Warcraft went live, it was always the GM's fault. No matter what happened, it was always the GM's fault. That's Game Master for people who aren't in that lingo.
And those were mostly volunteers, is that correct? The game masters, or were they actually Blizzard employees?
No, they were actually temp employees. They were through a temp agency in Texas at the time.
Gotcha.
But they started off as Blizzard employees. And there were still some legacy GMs who were Blizzard employees, legacies to the Game Master program, that is.
Right.
So as they realized it was getting evolving too fast, that's when they started actually employing temp agencies to do that.
Now, one person that I'm keenly interested in, on your opinion, is, and just let me set the context for this. Recently, we've learned that basically the entire marketing behind Overwatch 2 was based on lies, because the company knew that they were not going to produce that which they had said they would produce. And then consumers were purchasing the product thinking that that was still true, with the company not declaring that they had already ended the project to produce said content. And so now you have an Overwatch 2 that was largely purchased and adopted based on a lie, and players are essentially playing Overwatch 1.1, perhaps. That may be a little generous. But Jeff Kaplan was the head of Overwatch. He was the head, I believe, of Project Titan before that, worked extensively in World of Warcraft, worked his way up from the bottom, I believe. And he left Overwatch 2 during its development. I have heard from sources that he left because he was not in agreement with this idea of scaling it far back and, I suppose, deceiving the consumer. Did you ever have any interactions with Jeff Kaplan, and what is your thought on him in regards to the type of leader he is? Do you think he might have been the kind of person who would stand up against corporate malfeasance in terms of deceiving consumers?
Okay, so some history I can point out about Jeff Kaplan. First off, he was somebody who's brought in from Tom Chilton, which was he was one of the members of Tom Chilton's guild during EverQuest. And that's where a lot of Tom Chilton's hires came from, that particular guild. Legacy of Steel it was. So he actually came in already being planned to be a developer, and spent, I think, like the first 9 months of his time at Blizzard basically playing through the games to get a really strong understanding of what Blizzard was producing, what they were making. From the time he started at Blizzard, he actually always wanted to make an FPS. So I know that was always on his mind, but Blizzard didn't have a usable FPS at the time. I don't believe he was the lead of Project Titan. I'm actually almost positive of that, but he was around the Project Titan group.
And was it Metzen then who was the lead on Titan?
I don't recall. I know whoever it was got fired when they fired all the people from Titan. Basically,
okay, so then not Metzen, because he stayed over for Overwatch.
Yeah. So Titan, it was meant to be the next MMO, and it was meant to be more of a futuristic vibe. At certain times, they had talked about using Starcraft as the basis for it, but they decided to make a new IP. I'm not privy to how, when, why they did that. I would almost suggest they were probably trying to compete a little bit more with the Warhammer 40K type direction, since a lot of Blizzard's IPs had been based on Warhammer after a fashion. So, as far as him going, I can tell you that when Activision bought the company, the vibe was already there that it was not going to be good. And a lot of the people who were in seats of power were already basically making their resumes or their plans to leave the company. We knew, at least people who knew Morhaime well, we knew he was going to leave a good 3 years before he actually made his announcement. It was kind of known within certain spheres. And same thing was with Metzen. I think Tom Chilton was planning to leave and then never did. Other people who left, I wish I had a laundry list. I can't think of anybody off the top of my head. But a lot of the prolific names had left around that time or were planning to leave. Kaplan kind of stayed on only because he got his dream to make an FPS. Titan basically was evolving with building all the features out that players were crying about wanting in World of Warcraft. Things like player housing, guild housing, that kind of stuff. And what happened is we saw Titan had all these features, but no story, no direction, no plan for endgame, just feature after feature after feature is being built.
And did you get a chance to play any of the builds of Titan?
No, that was definitely a period of time when they were being a lot more strict on who could see what projects, and you had to be read for the programs at that time.
And that would have been absolutely top secret for Blizzard.
Yeah, so there were people, of course, who had connections who would be able to play it, but outside of that, like they would technically have to like hide their screens if they were playing it.
Can I ask? You said the name Metzen.
Mm-hmm.
Chris Metzen.
Chris Metzen. Okay, sorry. I was just I'm trying to take notes. So
yeah, Frosthammer, can you tell people about who Chris Metzen is? If you're a Blizzard aficionado, that name is going to be absolutely crystal clear. But for everybody in the audience, they may not be aware of who he is. Can you lay out Metzen and his history in the company?
Okay. This is going to be a little bit tough for me because I do not have good feelings for Chris Metzen. I know a lot of people love him.
It's okay. We want you to be honest. We want you to be honest. At the same time, we don't take cheap shots at people. But just, give us your honest vibes, and where we can be kind, let's be kind. And where we can't, we understand.
Okay. Chris Metzen was hired originally, basically almost out of high school. I believe he was 18 or 19 when he was actually hired by Blizzard. So he was definitely the youngest guy on staff at the time. But make no mistake, he was there for 25 years. He was the first person to get they were giving crowns and rings for anniversaries at that point, and he was one of the first people inducted into that program. Just the recap, since that might have gone over some people's head, Blizzard has a program that when you make certain milestones of being there, you get certain gifts from the company. At 2 years, you get a Stein. At 5 years, you get a sword. At 10 years, you get a shield. At 15 years, you get a ring. And I think at 20 years, you get a crown.
Wow.
So Chris Metzen was kind of hired because he had a lot of knowledge of Warhammer, specifically because the original Warcraft 1 game was originally built to be a Warhammer game. And I don't know what happened and what caused the divide, but Games Workshop and Blizzard had a divide of their interests. Knowing how Games Workshop is, I think Games Workshop kind of went, this isn't worth our time. We're going to go back and do our own thing or something to that effect. But I don't know the specifics. So the person who was acting as the creative head at the time, well, not exactly at the time, because you had to get to the point when Blizzard North joined Blizzard. That's who a gentleman named Bill Roper came from. Bill Roper was honestly one of the most creative and nicest guys I ever met. Him, along with some of the other key people I had mentioned to you in the email, are people who made the company what it was. Bill Roper was the guy who helped engineer a lot of the ideas that engineered the creativity for the game. He was also one of the guys who did a lot of the voice acting as well. And that's kind of where Chris Metzen, I think, got the idea to voice act himself.
Playing the role of Thrall, correct?
Yeah. I wouldn't necessarily put money on that, but I'm pretty sure that's where that whole idea from him came from. So at one point, Vivendi was starting to bleed money, and they were trying to figure out who and how to sell. They were trying to sell off the entire Blizzard unit. The entire gaming unit from Vivendi as one company, or as one group of companies. And a certain company named Microsoft wanted to get access to just Blizzard, so they could force Blizzard to make just console games for their newly released Xbox system. And everybody at the company knew that was going to be like the death sentence for Blizzard. Much the same way that people knew it was going to be a death sentence when Activision bought Blizzard. And I don't know the exact details of what happened, but Bill Roper essentially, in his Paladin-esque ways, cast divine intervention on Blizzard and annoyed Microsoft so much and Vivendi so much that he soured the deal that it couldn't happen. And like I said, I don't know the exact details, but I know that he was instrumental in making it not happen. But as a result, he was asked to leave the company. Not exactly fired.
He fell on his own sword then to protect Blizzard.
Quite literally. And that's something that a lot of people at Blizzard don't understand these days. The history that's spread about Roper, which I'm really sad about, is that he was a kook, he was insane, but he was the guy who was always there, like at Friday Night Magic and Saturday Night D&D, come up with these campaigns and ideas for the employees to have fun and try to use that as tools to build innovation and new ideas within the company.
So in other words,
fantastic.
Sorry about that. So in other words, what he was doing was creating a positive work environment where not only it would trigger more creativity within the franchises, but build a stronger team working ethic through these D&D games.
Absolutely.
So it was becoming more interpersonal as well as interprofessional at the same time without crossing the lines.
Correct. And Blizzard used to love the idea that they were a company that were not just employees or colleagues, they were friends and family too. And that's something that evaporated in later Blizzard.
I'm reading over some of these profiles while you're talking, and it occurs to me, Kaplan. It says that his online handle for EverQuest. Do you know what it was?
Tiggle
I don't know how
It was. Thank you for saying it instead of me, Pro.
You're welcome, Jonas. I'm here for you. Tiggle Bitties.
Yeah, which
I'll let the audience figure that one out.
And he was in a guild with Rob Pardo, it looks like. Anyways, long story short, it looks like there is a big separation here between gaming culture and the company providing the gaming. Or I should say Activision, forgive me. Blizzard at the time seemed like a very gaming culture centered company. And as they've gotten away from that, there's been this corporate overlay, and this corporate woke overlay could never fly with hiring someone with that as their gamer handle. So you have someone who is completely separated from their audience, making content and making things to be consumed by an audience that they maybe don't think very much of.
I would agree on that. And I say that also because if you follow the line, I had mentioned that he was a hire from Tom Chilton. He was the first person to get hired at Blizzard from Legacy of Steel, to the best of my knowledge. And I feel like those employees getting hired was both a boon and a massive problem for Blizzard at the same time. Mm-hmm. They were the ones, in my opinion, who were introducing a lot of these cultural elements that got away from gaming and the pillars of the company, and more in towards of trying to play this rat racing game where they saw their guild as the supreme team, and they wanted to beat out everybody else and make sure that they got their people in the places they wanted to be.
So, Frost, let's talk about two games that I think are indicative of the beginning of the downfall for Blizzard. And, of course, Blizzard and Activision have the chance to redeem themselves in the future. Right now, though, they're not in a great place. I also find it fascinating that I see parallels between Blizzard and Disney, which is such an odd thing to say, but if you think about it, Blizzard became the absolute king of creativity, of creating classic games, genre-defining franchises, and they held on to that for perhaps a decade. And I find that fascinating because Disney at times has done the same. And then I see that perhaps hubris is what has knocked Blizzard off of its pedestal and emptied out its coffers of its geniuses. I think the same has happened with Disney, with John Lasseter and others leaving the company, and now they cannot find their way. But going to these two games that I found to be indicative of the problem. Diablo 3, I saw the problems begin, but I don't want to include it because it doesn't fully define where I think the huge mishaps began. And the two games that I find to be so problematic, first, Heroes of the Storm. I want to talk about that with you. I don't know how much knowledge you have of Heroes of the Storm or its development, but I found the way that Blizzard ended that game to be very unsavory. And I think that really, it knocked the pillars out from underneath the company, despite the fact that it was not a huge game, that it was not what you would consider to be a tentpole item inside the company. I think that the way it was handled was an indicator to games, to gamers, to esports professionals that Blizzard could no longer be trusted to uphold the pillars that they had once believed in. So can you walk us through, if you have knowledge of it, and if not, it's okay, but can you walk us through the development of Heroes of the Storm and the ending of Heroes of the Storm and why it had to happen in such an awful way?
Okay, let's actually go back to Diablo 3 because you're more right than you realize on Diablo 3. I'm sure you guys all heard of Duke Nukem Forever, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Never. No, never. I've never heard it. Groovy.
Well, let's call Diablo Forever. Diablo 3, that is, because it was actually in development for over 15 years. And I think actually the number is actually more like 17 years.
Can we pause there, Frost? I want to ask you a question about that.
Sure.
Blizzard North, obviously in charge of Diablo 1 and Diablo 2. David Brevik, I believe, is the name of the man who was in charge of Blizzard North. Quite the separation once Blizzard North was severed from Blizzard proper. Did that create a situation where Blizzard proper did not know how to bring forth a game such as Diablo 3? They seem to struggle with the style.
You're bringing up some names I haven't heard in a while, and thank you for that because these are people I shouldn't be forgetting. So Dave Brevik left with Bill Roper, and they actually went to make Hellgate London. There's a couple other prolific names along with that. And that was, I hear some sighing. Do you want to mention what?
No, I could do a quick research because that name sounds very familiar.
I have not heard that name in a long time.
Hellgate London was a game that these guys were producing at, well, let me actually take a step back because this is a piece of knowledge that a lot of people don't realize. A lot of you probably remember Ventrilo, right?
Yes.
Ventrilo was put out by Bill Roper's new company to help fund them while they were trying to get their footing for making a new gaming company.
How interesting is that? And then Ventrilo being used by gamers for Blizzard games and other games as well.
That's something I thought was absolutely ingenious. And yes. I had the privilege of still being in contact with Bill Roper during that time.
The VoIP software?
No, Ventrilo is a voice communication software. It's one of the first more popularized ones.
Oh, okay. It sounds like it is the same thing. Just I was thinking of it. Voice over IP, as in it is.
I thought you said played, not. I didn't catch what you said actually. Okay, so yeah, one same page.
So let's talk about Diablo 3. Let's talk about the I guess the slide began. So tell us about that.
Okay, so I wouldn't quite say the creativity died out at Diablo 3, but the mismanagement started happening quite a bit. And I don't know who was in charge of what teams because during that evolution, I wasn't at Blizzard. I was only hearing about it second and third hand. But as far as like, I can actually invalidate that these do exist because they were on the I'm trying to think what I should and shouldn't say because of potential NDA exposures. But let's just say the server we had all the games on did have multiple versions of the Diablo 3 tests. And we also had several after action reports about what happened at the end of those games as well on our wiki. So Diablo 3 went through 3 or 4 iterations where basically they started an entire team. The team didn't perform or they didn't perform to expectations. And without too much corrective action, they basically disposed of the team and started a new team.
And why do you think that was? Why do you think that they were suddenly unsuccessful to that level?
I have a hard time honestly knowing exactly why, because again, that was a time I wasn't with the company. I was more hearing about, hey, we have a new Diablo 3 client running. It looks pretty cool. some cool ideas that came from it. These are all things I hear secondhand. And then next thing I hear is they got rid of most people from that team and started a new team. And I think there was a belief that, and I don't know who started it, that once a team has proven that they are not capable of doing the task unmanaged or unmonitored, they tended to get rid of them.
And by that you mean they didn't just disassemble the team, they terminated the contract with the employees within the team.
Correct. And there's always a scramble for people within the team to try to keep their job.
Oh, that's horrible.
Shift to another department to stay within their job. So I know
you said that you were able to play the first iterations.
The first iteration I was able to play was the one I believe the first team made, and the only thing that was left over from it was a combat system, like a PvP system, which is a really cool system that never made it out to any of the Diablo games, to the best of my knowledge. I should put asterisks next to it. I haven't went through Diablo 4 yet. I'm not sure if I'm going to, but a lot of the ideas from it were really cool. There were, I can't remember how to even explain it, but imagine just like having like a arena similar to how World of Warcraft arenas work, but yet it's the size of a battleground, and in terms of what World of Warcraft, and you'd have 10, 20 people that are just trying to hunt each other down, between trying to also knock out enemies and get big buffs so they could go knock somebody down. So the shrines, for instance, that are in Diablo, they existed inside that PvP system, and you could actually get stack up a bunch of shrines and be so overpowered when you go get somebody else.
And it's kind of like an early MMO style competition.
It sounds like you're describing. Sorry,
go ahead, Stephen.
I was going to say, that sounds like you're describing Diablo had a potential to become a MOBA.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say. Sorry. Inarticulate. Thank you, Stephen.
It was, honestly, I'm still very
like League of Legends, pretty much. Like you have you have two opposite teams. You're killing minions to get powers. You're capturing towers, taking out higher level enemies, and then you're also doing PvP at the same time on a battleground.
To be honest with you, I'm really not sure why Diablo wasn't the candidate for their MMO over World of Warcraft. I suspect Bill Roper had something to do with that, because I think he liked the lore that came out of Warcraft a lot more. And
probably thought it had better. I would think that it had better opportunity for market saturation due to the colors. They probably felt that Diablo would be a little too dark and gritty to make it into some markets. I don't know that for sure.
That's possible too, but I know the other one is, like I said, Metzen was basically the Warhammer aficionado. He knew the game inside and out, and since there was a lot of leading some Warcraft into Warhammer, there was a lot more to pull from as far as the whole market saturation goes. Also, on top of that, D&D also was based in the medieval type stuff too. That was a little bit closer to World of Warcraft. So those are guesses. Those aren't actual I know this happened kind of things.
So talk to us about the when Diablo 3 comes out. How does that impact the company? I know it was not received in the same way that other Blizzard games had been received. Particularly, the auction house was very divisive. The tone of the game seemed odd. And then I'd like for you to segue that into our discussion about Heroes of the Storm, which I do feel was the beginning of the end of the era of dominance from Blizzard.
Okay, so one thing, well, there's a couple. I think we're at the point where Blizzard started having problems with execution, and they were getting way too engaged with what the audience was saying before it came out. And I know there's a sense of hubris there, but making a quick segue into Starcraft II, one of the reasons Starcraft II didn't have the impact it did is Blizzard was way too concerned with what pro gamers were talking about Starcraft in terms of how it needs to play, how they wanted it to play, how they expected to play. And part of that came down to the fact that at that point, Starcraft was considered to be the national sport of South Korea. So there was a lot of a lot of push to make sure that it was done super right, but in making it quote unquote super right, they were not engaging in their best ideas. There were so many really cool ideas in StarCraft II that just never got out because of that. I'm trying to think if I can even remember any of the specifics.
Are you saying like pretty much they focused so much on trying to make the Korean #1 technically esport that they forgot the general player base of what StarCraft started off to be?
That, and they focused way too much on ideas that were coming out of there versus what were coming out of North America as far as like that goes. I mean, for instance, South Korea had access to the alpha a whole year before the United States had access to the alpha.
What?
Right. So and then they also divided that game into 3 parts, which was perhaps a very prideful tactic that did not pay off. Do you have any thoughts on the very strange way they rolled out StarCraft II in terms of 3 totally whole products?
Bobby Kotick.
That's a great answer, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
And at the beginning of the Kotick era.
Actually,
I will say that decision was made before Activision officially bought Blizzard, but it was very clear there was influences there to push that idea. That actually dated back to the BlizzCon of 2007, I believe, where there were some. I think, honestly, Activision was trying to get into that suit for a long time. But I don't know if you guys don't remember where Bobby Kotick got a lot of his finances from. He's the guy who personally screwed over 4 kids and basically took all the money and ran. To be more specific on that, he was the guy who was actually the board member who pushed 4 kids. Taking one step back because I know I'm getting ahead of myself. So the agreement with 4 kids, and I don't go into massive stuff.
4 Kids Entertainment. Sorry, I was thinking of literal 4 kids. Yes, 4 Kids Entertainment.
Yeah, 4 Kids Entertainment. So 4 Kids Entertainment ran the Pokemon franchise, and
Yes.
there was financial agreements that were made between 4 Kids and Tokyo Japan. Is it? I think that's the company. I can't remember which company actually runs the franchise or ran the franchise back then in Japan. But the company in question, Kotick, was basically falsifying numbers and pocketing the money in between. So he by the time 4 Kids was starting to get, not 4 Kids, Tokyo. Does anybody actually know the name of that company? Because I'm drawing a blank on it.
Steven would have the best chance. I don't know it off the top of my head.
Just give me a quick 4 Kids. What was it?
4
I
Kids
think
Entertainment.
it's Tokyo that ran the franchise in Japan.
The Toei?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, okay.
So the agreement with them, the financial agreements, basically, like I said, Kotick was hiding numbers. He had, his spreadsheet of his numbers, and then the spreadsheet he was telling them about. And 4 Kids were starting to go, these numbers don't look right. So at some point, he actually, sold all his shares in 4 Kids, got out, and the company who bought 4 Kids went, oh, we owe a lot of money to Toei. And that's really what killed 4 Kids is, Kotick exiting the company with millions in his pocket while hiding the numbers.
Well, I'm no fan of him. He's done things as the CEO of Activision Blizzard, which really stretch the mind to be able to believe. But they seem to be true. We're not going to allege them here, but I'll just say he seems to be utterly despicable. I mean, I don't know any other way to describe him.
He goes from one company to another, one industry to another, basically destroys that industry and then pockets as much money as he can and goes to the next one. And I expect he's going to do that when Microsoft finally buys Blizzard, which, going back to the earlier point I was saying about Microsoft trying to buy Blizzard back from the end, it's quite funny to me that 20 years later, they finally actually get to buy Blizzard.
Well, they're trying at least. We'll see how it plays out in Europe. But
so far, it looks like they're giving it a go now, from what I understand, unless some new hiccup has come.
Well, folks, that's the end of the interview for today. There's far more, and we are continuing to have conversations with this individual whose identity we know, but who we are keeping anonymous for the purposes of protecting their career. They have really stuck their neck out, though, and we are so appreciative. If you are watching this video at the time of its release, we will soon have a live show, The Pro Show Live, Thursday, June 22nd, 5 to 7 p.m., where we will be having this whistleblower on live to answer questions from the audience. You are not going to want to miss that. Folks, if you like content like this, consider clicking the like button, share, subscribe, and you can stick it to the algorithms when you click it. We're talking about the notification bell. And wherever you are, whatever you're doing, keep learning, keep growing, and keep having fun.